Today we are going to read the first chapter from the book First Light, and name of the chapter is A Letter to God, written by G.L. Fuentes. Before you read, they say faith can move mountains, but what should we put our faith in? This is the question this story delicately poses. People believe that faith can move mountains. Faith has immense power. But what should we put our faith in? That's the main question. That's the important question. What should we put our faith in? And this is the question this story also poses before us. This is a story about Lencho, who is a farmer who writes a letter to God when his crops are ruined. His crops are destroyed because of the hailstorms. And as his crops are destroyed, he writes a letter. He decides to write a letter to God, asking for 100 pesos. So in this story, we are going to find whether Lencho's letter reached God, and does God send him the money? Think what your answers to these questions would be, and guess how the story continues before you begin to read it. So here starts our story, A Letter to God. A letter to God. The house, the only one in the entire valley, sat on the crest of a low hill. Crest means top of a hill. From this height, one could see the river and the field of ripe corn, dotted with the flowers that always promised a good harvest. So Lencho's house was situated on the top of the hill, and it was the only house that was built on the top of the hill in the entire valley. In fact, it was the only house in the entire valley. And from that height, one could see the river and the field of ripe corn, dotted with the flowers. Lencho was a farmer, and his field was full of ripe corn. Ripe corn, that means it was almost ready to be sold in the market. The harvest was very good. The only thing that the earth needed was a downpour, or at least a shower. Throughout the morning, Lencho, who knew his fields intimately, had done nothing else but see the sky towards the northeast. Now, although the corn was almost ripe, still his harvest, Lencho's harvest, needed a downpour. Downpour means a heavy rainfall, or at least a shower. Shower means a light rainfall. So although Lencho's harvest was almost ready to be sold in the market, still it needed one last rainfall. So Lencho was hoping for one last rainfall so that he could get much better harvest. And that's why throughout the morning he was looking towards the sky. Now we are really going to get some water, woman. The woman who was preparing supper replied, "Yes, God willing." Lencho was very hopeful that day they would get some rainfall, and he told his wife that they were going to get some rainfall that day. His wife was equally hopeful, who was preparing supper for her family. The older boys were working in the field while the smaller ones were playing near the house until the woman called to them all, "Come for dinner." Lencho's elder sons were working in the field at that time while the younger ones were playing near the house. Lencho's wife called them for dinner. It was during the meal that just Lencho had predicted big drops of rain began to fall. As Lencho had predicted that they would get some rainfall that day, big drops of rain began to fall. In the northeast, huge mountains of clouds could be seen approaching. The air was fresh and sweet. The man went out for no other reason than to have the pleasure of feeling the rain on his body. And when he returned, he exclaimed, "These aren't raindrops falling from the sky. They are new coins. The big drops are 10-cent pieces and the little ones are fives." So as Lencho had predicted, it started to rain and Lencho was very happy. His harvest needed one last rainfall and he was hoping for that rainfall, and it started to rain. To get the feel of the rain, he went outside and he exclaimed happily that these are not merely raindrops, these are just like the coins. Big drops are cent pieces and the little ones are fives. Now he is comparing those raindrops with the coins because, as we have already read, that Lencho's harvest needed one last rainfall, and so that rainfall was very important, very useful for Lencho's harvest, and that's why Lencho is comparing those raindrops with the coins. With a satisfied expression, he regarded the field of ripe corn with its flowers draped in a curtain of rain. Draped means covered. So Lencho was very satisfied because, as expected, his harvest was getting rainfall and he was very satisfied with this outcome. But suddenly a strong wind began to blow, and along with the rain, very large hailstones began to fall. Suddenly the strong wind began to blow, and along with the rain, very large hailstones. Hailstones means frozen raindrops. Hailstones means frozen raindrops. So along with the rain, frozen raindrops, the hailstones began to fall. And these truly did resemble new silver coins. Now these hailstones, these frozen raindrops now really resembles silver coins. But these frozen raindrops, these hailstones, proved disastrous for Lencho's harvest, Lencho's crops. The boys, exposing themselves to the rain, ran out to collect the frozen pearls. Lencho's sons were very excited and they got outside to collect those hailstones in their hands, which resembled frozen pearls. "It's really getting bad now," exclaimed the man. "I hope it passes quickly." as we know that hailstones are not good for harvest. It destroys the harvest, and that's why Lancho says that it's getting very bad now, and he hopes that this hailstones quickly stopped. It did not pass quickly. For an hour the hail rained on the house, the garden, the hillside, the cornfield, on the whole valley. The field was white as if covered with salt. Unfortunately, the hail did not pass quickly. For an hour, the hail rained on the house, it rained on the garden, on the hillside, and even on the cornfield, Lancho's harvest. So the whole valley and the field was white as if it was covered with salt. The whole valley and the field of Lancho looked like it was covered with salt. Not a leaf remained on the trees. The corn was totally destroyed. So because of the hailstones that rained for almost an hour, all the leaves on the trees fallen down. The corn was totally destroyed. Lancho's harvest in the field was totally destroyed. The flowers were gone from the plants. Lancho's soul was filled with sadness. The flowers were also gone, and Lancho's soul was filled with sadness. He was very sad, and it was obvious because his harvest was destroyed. All his hard work had gone to nothing. He had worked very hard for this harvest, but all his hard work had gone to nothing. When the storm had passed, he stood in the middle of the field and said to his sons, "A plague of locusts." Locusts means insects which fly in big swarms or groups and destroy crops. Locust is a kind of insects which is very harmful for the fields, which is very harmful for the harvest, for the crops, because it totally destroys crops. So when the storm had passed, Lancho stood in the middle of the field and said to his sons, "A plague of locusts would have left more than this. The hail has left nothing. This year we will have no corn." Lancho tells his sons that even the group of locusts would have left something to eat, would have left something in the field, but these hailstones had left nothing in the field. And he was sure that his family would have no corn that year. They would have nothing to eat, they would have nothing to sell in the market. That night was sorrowful one, very bad one. All our work for nothing. Lancho is telling his family members that all their work had come to nothing. There's no one who can help us. We'll all go hungry this year. He was sure that nobody could help them in these difficult times, and he was sure that his family would go hungry that year. They had nothing to eat, and a bleak future was awaiting them. But in the hearts of all who lived in that solitary house, solitary means only. So in the hearts of all who lived in that solitary or the only house in the middle of the valley, there was a single hope: help from God. Although Lancho's field Although Lencho's harvest was totally destroyed, still they were hopeful. They were hopeful that God would help them. Don't be so upset, even though this seems like a total loss. Remember, no one dies of hunger. They were trying to build confidence of each other, and someone from their family say to other members that don't be so upset. Although it seems a total loss, although the harvest is totally destroyed, but he or she says that no one dies of hunger. The God gives something to eat. That's what they say, no one dies of hunger. And other members also agrees that yes, no one dies of hunger. God will give them something to fill their stomach. All through the night, Lencho thought only of his one hope, the help of God, whose eyes, as he had been instructed, see everything, even what is deep in one's conscience. So throughout the night, Lencho was thinking about only one thing, that God would help them to get out of this difficult situation. Lencho was an ox of a man. Ox of a man means he was a very hard-working man. He worked like an ox in his fields, working like an animal in the fields, but still he knew how to write. Although he was a farmer, but he also knew how to write. The following Sunday at daybreak, he began to write a letter which he himself would carry to town and place in the mail. It was nothing less than a letter to God. So the next Sunday, Lencho started writing a letter when the sun rose. He took that letter to the town and mailed it. It was nothing less than a letter to God. Lencho wrote that letter to God. It was very strange that someone has written a letter to God, but he had so much faith, so much confidence in God that God would help him, that Lencho wrote a letter to God. God, he wrote, if you don't help me, my family and I will go hungry this year. I need 100 pesos in order to sow my field again and to live until the crops comes, because the hailstorms ... So Lencho wrote in the letter that the God should help him because the hailstorms had destroyed his crops completely. And he asked for 100 pesos. Pesos is the name of the currency that was prevalent in that country. Just like we use rupees, similarly, the name of the currency that was used in that country was peso, currency of several Latin American countries. So Lencho asked for 100 pesos from the god, and he wrote in the letter that hailstone had completely destroyed the harvest and he needed 100 pesos so that he could sow his field again. He wrote to God on the envelope. So on the envelope he wrote to God. He wrote the address to God. So the letter was addressed to the God. He put the letter inside the envelope and, still troubled, went to town. At the post office, he placed a stamp on the letter and dropped it into the mailbox. Lanchu went to the town, and at the post office, he placed a stamp on the letter and he dropped the letter in the mailbox. One of the employees, who was a postman and also helped at the post office, went to the boss laughing heartily and showed him the letter to God. Never in his career as a postman had he known that address. One of the employees of that post office, who was a postman, laughed heartily when he noticed that someone had mailed a letter to God. Someone has addressed a letter to God, and he began laughing heartily, loudly. And to share his feelings, the postman took that letter to his boss, the postmaster. The postmaster, a fat, amiable fellow, also broke out laughing. But almost immediately he turned serious and, tapping the letter on his desk, commented, "What faith! I wish I had the faith of the man who wrote this letter, starting up a correspondence with God." When the postmaster saw that letter, he also started laughing, but almost immediately he stopped and became serious. He could not believe himself that someone had so much faith in God that he had written a letter to God. Postmaster was deeply impressed that how could someone had so much faith in God that he had a correspondence, a conversation with God. Someone is writing a letter to God. This is truly amazing. So, in order not to shake the writer's faith in God, the postmaster came up with an idea: answer the letter. But when he opened it, it was evident that to answer it, he needed something more than goodwill, ink and paper. But when the postmaster opened the envelope, he found that he needed more than goodwill to answer that letter, because the person who had written that letter, that means Lanchu, he had asked for 100 pesos from God. So in order to answer that letter, the postmaster needed more than goodwill. But he stuck to his resolution. He asked for money from his employees. He himself gave part of his salary, and several friends of his were obliged to give something for an act of charity. The postmaster wanted to fulfill his resolution. He had promised to himself that he would do something so that the Lanchus, the person who had written that letter, his faith could not be shaken. And that's why he asked for money from his employees, and postmaster himself gave part of his salary. He also asked his friends to help with some money as an act of charity. It was impossible for him to gather together 100 pesos, so he was able to send farmer only a little more than half. He put the money in an envelope addressed to Lanchu, and with it a letter containing only a single word as a signature, God. It was impossible for the postmaster and his colleagues to gather to collect 100 pesos, so they collect more than half of it, that means precisely 70 pesos. they could able to collect only 70 pesos. They put that money in an envelope and addressed that letter, that envelope, to Lancho. They also put a letter and just wrote a single word on that letter, a signature of God. As they did not want to shake Lancho's faith in God, that's why they did not mention about themselves. They just write the name of the God on that letter. The following Sunday, Lancho came a bit earlier than usual to ask if there was a letter for him. It was the postman himself who handed the letter to him, while the postmaster, experiencing the contentment of a man who has performed a good deed, looked on from his office. Next Sunday, Lancho came in the post office to inquire if he had got any letter, and the postman delivered him a letter. The postmaster, who was sitting in his office, was looking at this whole incident from his office. He was contented, he was satisfied that he and his colleagues had done a good job. They had done a good deed. Lancho showed not the slightest surprise on seeing the money. Such was his confidence. Lancho had so much faith in God, he had so much confidence in God, that when he found the letter from God, which was actually not a letter from God but from the postmaster and his colleagues, he was not surprised. He had such faith, he had such confidence in God. He had 100% confidence that God would help him, and that's why he was not surprised to get the letter. But he became angry when he counted the money. God could not have made a mistake, nor could he have denied Lancho what he had requested. But when Lancho opened the envelope and he found that there were only 70 pesos in the envelope, he became angry. He had asked for 100 pesos from the God, and there were only 70 pesos in the envelope, and that's why he became angry. He believed that God could not make such a mistake. He was sure that someone had committed this crime. He was sure that someone had stolen this remaining money of 30 pesos. Immediately, Lancho went up to the window to ask for paper and ink. On the public writing table, he started to write with much wrinkling on his brow, caused by the effort he had to make to express his ideas. So Lancho was so much disturbed when he found that he had got only 70 pesos. He decided to write another letter to God. He went to the public writing table and started to write another letter to God. While he was writing the letter, there were much wrinkles on his brow. Brow means his forehead. There were wrinkles on his brow because he was writing with much effort. He was trying to express his inner ideas, his inner feelings. He wanted to show his feelings to the God, and he was perturbed, he was disturbed. That's why his forehead was wrinkled. When he finished, he went to the window to buy a stamp, which he licked and then affixed to the envelope with a blow of his fist. So after finishing the letter, after writing the letter, he bought a stamp and put it on the envelope, and he mailed this letter also. The moment the letter fell into the mailbox, the postmaster went to open it. It said, and the moment Lancho mailed that letter in the mailbox, the postmaster went to open it, and the postmaster took out the letter and started reading it. So we are now going to read what was written in that letter. God, of the money that I asked for, only 70 pesos reached me. Send me the rest, since I need it very much. But don't send it to me through the mail, because the post office employees are a bunch of crooks. Lancho. Lancho had written in the letter that, God, the money that you send me, I got only 70 pesos out of the 100 pesos. Send me the rest of the money. And he had written in the letter that this time, don't send me the money through the mail, send me through some other means, because these post office employees had stolen the 30 pesos from the envelope. And he believed that these post office employees were a bunch of crooks. They had stolen his money, 30 pesos out of 100 pesos, from the envelope. So this was a huge irony that the postmaster and his colleagues and friends who had helped the Lancho with the 70 pesos, now Lancho is accusing them of theft, of stealing the 30 pesos from the envelope. This was a huge irony. Lancho had complete faith in God, but he had no faith in his fellow beings. So this story has a big irony. This also shows us the reality of today's times, that how human beings have faith in God, but they don't believe in their fellow human beings. They suspect them. They suspect that their fellow beings could not do any good to them. Lancho, the main character of this story, he had complete faith in God. So when his crops were totally destroyed, he wrote a letter to God asking for 100 pesos so that he could sow his fields again. But when he got only 70 pesos, which were actually sent, which were actually given by the postmaster and his friends, he believed that the postmaster and the post employees were the bunch of crooks. It shows today's reality, that human beings may have complete faith in God, but human beings doesn't have any faith in his fellow human beings. Thank you for watching the video.